listening to TMI for the week of May 28th, 2018.
This week on the show, Dave speaks in studio with Toronto comedian Shawn Hitchins. See our show notes for his links. His book won an IPPY award for Humour in 2018. A brief history of oversharing. Ginger Nation founder, actor, performer, and stand-up comedian.
Go for the bronze.
Go for the bronze.
Is it going for the bronze or go for the bronze?
I think it's changed. Going for bronze is when I used to describe like Canadian ambition.
Okay.
Going for bronze.
Do you know what I thought it was?
What?
Redheads.
Oh no. I meant for
come
bronze.
on.
Well,
I
guess
thought that's what the joke was.
Oh, I didn't even know. That's how great I am. Wrote a double entendre and didn't mean it. Yeah. So I was always like amazed at like Canadians at the Olympics, and Canadians really getting so excited about winning a bronze medal, and then I was just so happy to just be we're on the podium, and then I won a bronze, and I've never been more happy. So yeah, because like I said that with the exchange rate, it's an American silver. So
You won the bronze in what?
The book that I just wrote just won a book publisher.
The IPPY.
Yeah, for Humour, and it's American, so that feels kind of nice. And
wow.
Weird Canadian, like self-deprecation, like being recognized by.
So Shawn Hitchins, and you wrote a book, Brief History of Oversharing.
Yeah. And I see that you have a copy of A Brief History of Time there, which is sitting right there, which is amazing.
Was that your influence?
Yeah. I just started, I was at a point, because the book was originally titled Ginger Nation, but it took so long and for the book to actually get finished that I just made a joke to my publisher. I was like, this is basically, I'm renaming it A Brief History of Oversharing after A Brief History of Time, because I was like, this is taking way too long, and it's going to be nowhere near Stephen Hawking's work. So
it's a collection of essays.
Yeah.
My question was, did you write the essays and then think about doing the book, or were the essays written for the book, or
essays were written for the book? So the book only existed as a concept based on my stand-up show that I had toured for 2 years, and then got to a point where I was on CNN and got this big ass deal for sort of like an HBO like comedy special, and then that was the level that they were trying to go. And then so most of the show was bought up except for a piece of that was the book option, and so that all fell apart, but the only thing that was existing was this book. So then I was sort of charged with like, all right, here's an opportunity to write a book. And so it was 2.5 years.
The show's TMI.
Yeah.
It is, so it could be 3 Mile Island. It could be too much information.
Yeah.
Oversharing.
Oh, yeah.
There could be a connection there. There's like too much information, oversharing.
Oh, yeah.
How does the oversharing? So these days, making sense of what's happening in our culture or news, we're bombarded by different sources of information. It's too much information. What's oversharing? That's more personal.
Well, yeah, oversharing is totally... you're the first person to ask me about that. I think just because generally oversharing is just something that everybody's accepted as our new way of communicating.
So it's not an intimate thing between family members.
Well,
it could be.
Yeah, and there's this sense of like...
but that's what we do on social media. We tell people when we try a new peanut butter. We like...
Right.
This is oversharing.
Well, there's this need to document our existence now.
Yeah.
And I find social media to be something that I'm really sort of in protest with these days, because I try to think about what, like... having social media and having a product and trying to, and being a comedian and or a performer, it's your currency, and it has put your work on the same level of someone making cupcakes, and it's not actually about your work. It's about how you filter yourself and how you present yourself and how you actually frame your life. So even oversharing on Facebook, it's just people constantly feeling this need to frame their existence.
For comedians, though, it's an important platform that would fill rooms if you did it
totally
right.
And I kind of feel like a little old these days. And I'm like, how do I do the social media? How do I? Because like I could sell out a room when Facebook first started. I could post one thing and I could fill 150 seats. And now it's a little bit more with the algorithms, and now Facebook is trying to make you pay for sort of like content and getting into certain.
The number of users has skyrocketed, so you become kind of, in a way, you could be lost in a sea of billions.
Yeah,
that's complicated.
Yeah.
So, a march in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
You packed up and went to the UK. Yeah. Did you have a connection with the UK? Like, why?
So my connection was, so Edinburgh is sort of like Edinburgh Fringe is the biggest fringe festival in the world.
It's also a big comedy festival there.
Yeah, a huge part of it. So it's also dance, it's also mime, it's also glee clubs, it's theater, straight theater, solo shows, and it's all packed into an entire month. And there's about, 6,000-7,000 shows, and tens of thousands of performers, and 1 million people each day floating into the city, and you're there to sort of like trying to cherry pick an audience. And so it just seemed like the logical thing to do is to like, in order to get booked in Canada, you have to have some sort of outside of the country experience. Or
what about Montreal? Is that important?
Montreal for me is important for the food because it's delicious. In terms of comedy, it's important for a certain group, and that's mostly Americans.
Interesting.
It's an American festival.
So you go to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And it becomes a march.
Yeah. So the first year that I went, I did Edinburgh twice, 2011 and 2013. And then in 2011, I spent $15,000 to.
I was going to ask because
it's a lot of money. And so I invested $15,000 and rented a theater and flew a whole bunch of people over and like had a team. And I couldn't get more than 4 people into my show. And that's like a typical Edinburgh audience. So I was sort of kind of panicking, and the only way I could get people into my show was to actually just give away free tickets to people, but I had to target them. So I started targeting redheads.
Wow.
And giving away free tickets to redheads. And then my audience would go up to like 10 a show. And then I was like, oh, I'm doing something right. And then I came back. I was like completely, utterly humiliated and devastated because I had fundraised. I was like, people give money like for a number of reasons, but the main reason that they go is they want to see you succeed and like to come back and not have tangible success. So I did the first time I did it the way everybody told you to do it. I did it by the book, this prime venue, this, that, tick all the boxes. And the second time I got offered a 150 seat theater for free, as long as I could fill it. And I said, well, I couldn't fill a 30 seat venue. How am I going to fill 150 seats? And then I just went, okay, I'm going to do a Ginger Pride March. I'm going to do one of the largest publicity stunts that has ever been done at the festival. And so I got permission from the council, And I tweeted about it, and my tweet got picked up by a news bot in the UK. And then within 24 hours, we were issuing like press releases and sort of like trying to control what was happening. And then it grew and grew and grew in terms of the media, that by the time I landed, it was a double page feature in one of the newspapers. And then I had been on the ground for about a week, and I was like, I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to get kicked out of this country. Like, because I had like Australians coming up to me saying, well, you're going to start a race riot. And you're like, no, what race riot? What the fuck is going on? And then on the day, like, there was full on British paparazzi. And about 200 redheads show up between that. And we just marched through. It was very simple, like maybe lasted 20 minutes, but and then we did some cheering. There was like lots of cameras, and then right after that I got on to do like a couple spots on the BBC, and one of them by the end was BBC World Service. And I was like, they're like, oh, thanks, Shawn, that went to like something like 160 million people.
I've heard you do a Scottish accent of somebody
of the Virgin Mobile guy. Yeah. So when I landed, I went in to get the SIM card on for my phone, and I walked in the store, and the guy said, "You're the man who's come to save the gingers." And I was like, "How do you know this?" And he literally pulled open the newspaper, and it was a double page spread, color, and I knew I was in deep shit.
Okay, so here's a dumb question.
Yeah.
So gingers.
Yeah.
Can non-redheads even say that word?
In the UK, you can't. In North America, you can.
I didn't expect that answer.
Yeah.
I was trying to be funny.
Yeah. It's a word there.
Wow.
It is. It's one of those weird statements that a non-redhead cannot say to a redhead.
I can't believe it.
It's actually like really weird and
in Toronto as a kid, I was always a little intimidated by redheads. They were always the good-looking ones.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So they were like, a little bit elite.
Yeah.
And I knew that the girls, were very interested in them. And like they stuck out like a sore thumb, which was a good thing, at least in Toronto.
Yeah.
So this idea of hearing people making fun of redheads,
but it's not
came
just
as a surprise. And I understand that different places and countries have different, and you do explain some of the history behind the anti-redhead.
It's just like that influx of the Irish.
I think I even remember some sort of, politically incorrect comments in the 70s about fiery redheads.
Yeah.
But often that they were desirable people. I don't know.
Yeah, well, they're sexualized in North America, at least.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, like redheaded women are sexualized. Redheaded men, not so much. Redheaded kids, like, they sell our cereals. They're really commercial, viably commercial. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's why
Ron
this is
Howard.
so surprising.
Yeah, but not in the UK. You get your ass kicked.
Wow.
Yeah, which is kind of like really interesting to hear, like, even teens, millennials, and people. What's after millennials? I don't know. What age are we in now?
I can't figure out millennials. The other day I read an article. They were talking about millennials, and they included millennials born before 1980. And I'm thinking, by the time 2000 happens, those people are 20 years old. Is that a millennial? Because that's my point, is what is a millennial? In fact, because in that scenario, a millennial goes to age 47 in that model, 48. What the hell?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if that's, it's really weird because I think it's now down to whether you had an analog childhood or a digital childhood.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah. And I think 80s, like I didn't have a computer until I was 25. I also grew up in like a farming community, and we didn't really have computers. We didn't have internet. We didn't have cable. We didn't have anything like that.
My first computer, you plugged into a TV.
What?
Yeah, it was a Timex Sinclair 2036.
Timex Sinclair
It
would
was
be
the size of a keyboard.
Yeah.
That was the whole thing. And you plugged it into your TV. And for nerds, you learned basic programming, and you wrote your own little softwares. I think you could get a word processor, but it was so unstable and
Really?
would crash. Yeah. And it had something like, I don't know, 74K. That was its memory rather than gigabytes.
If I was an evil character on a soap opera, I would want to be named Timex Sinclair.
That was actually, before that, the real nerds, there's a couple of things. The ZX81 was a tiny little computer about the size of this digital recorder here.
Yeah.
And the nerds wrote software in BASIC for it and could do all kinds of crazy things on this little thing. And that led to the advancement to the Timex Sinclair 2036. They got out of computing, as we all can imagine. But it was a fusion between, I think, Timex, the watchmaker, and Sinclair Electronics or something. And they invented... I think they can be credited with putting small computers in homes.
Really?
Yeah.
Before Apple?
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever use an Icon computer?
Mm-mm. But I remember all these names.
All that like
PAT.
weird like greasy ball on the side that like you're like, what is on that ball?
I know somebody who's trying to take all those old machines and some older ones and make a museum exhibit out of them.
Really?
Yeah. And why not? It is part of our history and
right. Huh.
Nerdy.
I totally did not get looped into that at all.
Yeah.
I remember like in high school, like we had access to the internet, and I remember like Mrs. Dempster like trying to teach us what Alta Vista was. And like how to like reading off a sheet. Okay, kids, now you type in www, and we're all like, how many W's? And then dot, and then you would type in, and she's like, this is, and reading it, called a search engine.
Interesting.
Like we literally had to be groomed late in life. Like we were not even in a plastic state. Yeah. And now we complain if we can't like flick on it, if we can't like swipe on it.
Yeah.
Our patience has just become like zero.
I think historians must be having a field day trying to process what the change we've gone through into a history narrative of some kind.
Yeah.
But that, and the effects of that, which I was sort of going to get to later, is about these cultural changes. And you're talking about growing up in the digital age. It's obviously a huge impact on just how kids function on a day-to-day basis. But one of the things I was thinking about was free-range kids. So you grew up in Egypt, Ontario.
Yeah, 100%.
So, firstly, where is Egypt, Ontario?
It's on the south end of Lake Simcoe.
Okay.
Which is near Lake Keswick,
Yeah.
where like houses explode and like ice fishermen fall through the ice, and like probably a lot of meth comes from. And then Sutton, and then there's Pefferlaw, and in between there's a couple little like hamlets, like really intersections.
That's not that far from Toronto. I mean,
It's
far enough
not a
away,
far distance. It's a mental leap, though.
So north of Buttonville.
Oh yeah. Keep going up 48.
Yeah, I know 48 well, really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well. For years and years, I used to, in our family, was a caboose up around Norland.
Yeah.
And so for about 35 years, I looked after that. And so every weekend, up the 48.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We would call that cottage traffic, and we would sit there on Sunday nights and just wait for a speeding like Torontonian to come down our street and go off, because where our house is, there's like a death jog in the road. We call it like the death jog. And sort of like people would underestimate the severity of the jog, and then they would just sort of roll over in like an apple field, or like they would bust through the apple trees and land like in the field, and my father would just go, fuck, and then he would like put down his like fork, and my mother would calmly go over to like the phone and like dial in like, it's Linda Hitchins, somebody's gone through the intersection again. And like, it was this thing that happened almost every other Sunday night. It was a Sunday night ritual. My father would go and rip out a Torontonian out of like a flame engulfed car. And
I wonder if I know the turn.
Yeah.
So you're Egyptian.
Yeah.
But you were probably free range.
Oh yeah. Like I think back to like what we were exposed to. The best story is like how it was. Like we would help my grandfather around with the tractor, and we'd get grease on our hands, and then he would wash our hands with gasoline, and then I would say, is this safe? And he would go, just don't smoke. Like things like that. And then but we were actually washing our hands with gasoline to get the grease off. We would have hay wagon rides, and like cousins would fall off, like not for fun, like they would fall off the wagon and get run over by the wagon wheels, and that was part of it. We would jump in the hayloft and pitchforks, and like the golden rule was like in the back of like a tractor's, there's the little sort of like power sort of it's been so long I don't know what it's called, but it's like a little torquey thing that sort of spins around,
right?
And
you can run all kinds of other machines off it.
The only rule was that you can't put your foot or go near it or touch it or do anything like that. Wow. That was the only rule, and that was drilled into us because and it was like almost like a horror show, because you would hear like stories about like a farmer who accidentally like broke that rule. Like, true story, a farmer from a couple fields over was in the field one day working with his combine, and he broke the rule, and he like tried to dislodge a piece of wood from it, and by kicking it, and it ripped off his leg from underneath the knee. And he was in the middle of the field. They didn't have phones back then, or CBs on the thing. So he literally put on his rubber boot over the bloody stump, like basically put some baler twine tight around his thing, and then drove himself to the clinic.
He was probably back at work a week later.
But like that, and these stories would be told to us, and that would be drilled into us.
Wow.
Yeah. But like, you can ask for a better childhood. I mean, it got a little. It wasn't all.
So I'm thinking Lord of the Flies, essentially. I mean, because
we're children of the corn.
Well, in Toronto or up north, free range style of raising kids. Yeah. You're basically kicked out of the house. At 9 or whatever. And you don't come back till dinner time. And you're essentially raised by local kids.
Oh well, yeah. Lord, in that way, we had forts. We would take pieces of wood and a marble and some elastics and like a clothes peg, and when we would shoot ourselves with marbles, and then as we got older into pellet guns, we would put on my cousins would put on hockey equipment. At this point, I was like, I'm not doing this, but they would put on hockey equipment and then run around shooting each other with pellet guns, and
Now, I guess, it's easy to fall into this trap, but I think it makes a different kid.
It does.
It makes a different adult. So you couple that kind of societal change with the screens. And child raising. And then I was thinking, but they were always complaining in the 60s and 70s that kids were just being plunked in front of the TV.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably not as different in a way. I mean, a lot of us really were raised by TV. So when we think about kids these days being raised by their iPhones and tablets, and there's probably some similarity. It's not like it's a different species that's emerged.
Similar. I think there's something. I think our brain. I think there's addictive technology and addictive apps and addictive algorithms, and they're actually building apps to become addictive, and I think that's the terrifying thing. I think now that they're layering sort of like behavioral control and, you know, mind sort of, I don't want to say mind control, but I'm going to say grooming. I think people are being groomed and not knowing it. Right. I think the difference is that in the 60s and 70s, if you're watching television too much, your mom would come over, like rip out the cord of the wall and say, go outside. And you could go outside and you could just disappear for, you know, like 4 or 5 hours. And something was wrong if you came back in that time.
And today?
I mean, I receive a huge amount of texts. Like, it's weird. Like, if I don't receive a text, I'm like, oh, what's going on? Am I I'm addicted to my phone a bit, in a way. No, I'm totally addicted.
So it's interesting. So this is interesting to me.
Yeah.
So okay. So you're addicted to the texts.
Yeah.
A lot of young people are always on the screens. It's totally different landscape. And so for older farts, you would look at it and you would say, that let's say it's bad. But here's the deal. We never know what society is going to be 5 or 15 or more years into the future. How do you know your kid's not going to be running through a smoking junkyard being chased by robotic dogs? Like, you don't know the future that you're grooming your kids to cope with.
Are they?
And what if? And I mean, because just all you have to do is think back 15 years and look at how society's changed in unimaginable ways. So why wouldn't 15 years from now be a world we can't imagine? And screens obviously are going to be a big part of it. And so, are you addicted, or are you participating in the change in society?
I think where I struggle with it is how intimacy is changing, and I don't think it's being stripped. I think it's how our relationships are being formed. And I look at like dating apps, and which thankfully I'm not on, because I went through like it wasn't a messy breakup, but I went through a breakup, and then I had to come into this world where I felt like Mrs. Dempster was there once again, you know, telling me how to like use an app to go on a date. And how that there is a constant harvest, like there is an abundance. That's what it is. This false sense of abundance, especially with humans, and humanity.
One of the sites is called Plenty of Fish, and I thought right in the title it says no one has any value.
Yeah, and that's it. And so like things like where I would sort of like go into like, you know, like gays on Tinder, and then there's like chump something or something like that, and then there's like Grindr, and then there's all of these things, and how it's like this sense of like abundance, and it's just completely and utterly sad. I find it. I got in a bike accident while going down Yonge Street, and I hit a pothole, and I flipped over, and it was like right at St. Clair, just as the hill goes down by the Cineplex, and I literally like flipped over the handlebars and slid down my hip down the road, and then like a car stopped and was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I'm fine," and I was totally in shock. I was like bleeding. Still haven't got back on a bike, but pulled myself over. I was like, "Oh, I gotta phone somebody. I'm not well right now." And I opened up my phone, and it was like, went to like call 911 because that was all I could think of, and it was like, "You have a new match." And then I was like, oh, I have a new match. And so I flipped over. And then I was like, oh, he's okay. And I was like bleeding completely. My bike is like wrapped into itself and I'm sitting there like judging somebody on Tinder, and I was like, this is it. This is my level of self-care at this moment.
That's funny. How did your dad make you a comedian?
Oh yeah. Because in my book I dedicate the book to Harrison Ford for making me gay, and for my dad for making me a comedian.
So, are you a Star Wars guy or a Star Trek guy?
I would say I'm a Star Wars guy, but I'm a Star Trek, the first one.
Absolutely.
Like not the Next Generation or anything after that, but like give me like Captain Kirk and Tribbles and like.
Well, unfortunately, everything is relatable to the original series, TOS.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I was wondering about in the subject of redheads was whenever I think about redheads and what you're talking about, I always think of that episode where the aliens, there's two of them, and one is black on the right side and one is black left side.
Yeah.
And how ridiculous that is, and how arbitrary their differences are. And so everything, I believe, can be rooted back to an episode of Star Trek. But Star Wars, I have a little more trouble doing that with.
Yeah.
Harrison Ford and your dad.
Yeah.
So was your... Because aren't comedians always tortured people who... where their comedy is really sort of self-therapy, a cathartic...
Well, a lot of people are working stuff out on stage.
Okay.
And they're working it out, and I'm it's not a matter of being guilty about that, but like I've used that as a source. And my father, my father led me on a, like, I was part of that generation of gay, like, well, I believe it's still happening, but like when you came out of the closet, you were packing a car and you were leaving at the same time. So, and there were moments where I was like picking my stuff off the front lawn. So my father...
How old are you?
I'm now 38. It started like when I was like 14 or 15 and discovering like community theater, and then using that as like an escape from the house. And then that turned into professional theater. And then all of a sudden I was 18 and, doing like summer stock productions and really working with adults and getting a reflection or being able to see what a healthy relationship with an adult was, even though in the musical theater world you are groomed by not the greatest people. So in itself, you're like, oh, you step back a little later and you go, oh, that wasn't even a safe space. But
you're the second comedian I've talked to who started in theater.
Yeah.
I think that's not normal.
Yeah.
Most people would start in comedy and then go to acting.
Yeah.
And so I think that's interesting. I wonder if that's...
Yeah, I sort of did a reverse.
Yeah.
When I moved to the city, I was 19, and I was a child.
It's a hell of a time to move to a big city.
Yeah, like right at Y2K, like I'm seeing cable for the first time. I'm seeing diversity. I'm seeing just a whole world of like everything that I had sort of been shielded against. So it was like I was a mess. And so I was drinking a lot and partying a lot and really discovering my sexuality in an environment where there were no mentors. And then at the same time I was going on stage and like doing Second City and hearing things like, you're not dad enough to be in our in our company, and really trying to like find space to do whatever what I felt like I needed to do. And eventually I just started like, it got to a point where I just started renting theaters and putting on shows.
We didn't get an answer to how your dad turned you into a comedian.
So my father was violent with me, and in a way where he was working on his own stuff through me.
Wow.
Like both, it was a farm, so like, both, you'd get hit by both. My mom would hit us because like we did something. She's like, you need to learn this, but my father was working through stuff through me.
So you had siblings?
Yeah, I had a sibling who had a very different experience than I did, and we sort of like, it's this wonderful thing about living in a bungalow with people in the middle of nowhere, is that you can have individual experiences inside of that, and you can
Are you the older kid?
I'm the younger. So because I was a really effeminate kid, my father was really trying to like steer it in a direction, and using what little empathy he had earned from his father. So it was sort of like this history of, systemic violence that wasn't afforded to low income people and new immigrants, or newcomers to Canada. But the only time my father and I could sort of be alone together, where I wasn't sort of hypervigilant and trying to track where he was in the house or what mood he was in, would be when he was downstairs in his like man cave, which he still has, which is kind of a lot of fun. And I talk about all of this in the way that, from a place of like, I have come to terms. Mm-hmm. My father never learned from having a gay kid. Like, he never learned the lesson that comes from having a gay kid, which is a gift.
But nowadays that we're talking about, that it's not looked at as a choice.
Yeah.
Is this not informing his?
Well,
You said he hasn't learned anything.
Well, he didn't learn from having a gay kid. He learned from having a sick wife. And so what he learned, because my mother has MS, and he's become a totally different person. And in a way that when I had a child, because I have a child with a lesbian couple, it sort of changed the whole dialogue. Because he's learned empathy and compassion and care and all of these things that, like, when I look at him now and go, I've actually said to him, like, I don't know who the fuck you are, but like welcome. This is the thing that I sort of needed when I was like 13 or 14.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't available. He didn't have the agency to do that. So the reason why he made me a comedian was because the only time I felt safe with him was when he was downstairs. My mom had gone to Bodley's Video, which was like this crazy video store on the main street of Sutton, which was half a knitting store on one side. So it was like right down the middle, like you walked in, and Mrs. Bodley had her side, perfect relationship, was all knitting, like yarn and patterns and like sewing needles. And on this side, Mr. Bodley had like a shag carpeted wall with like VHS tapes and like these little like buttons that would were Velcroed, and it was very meticulous, and each had like a typewriter, like sort of like D37, and then you would go and you would pull it off this metallic button, and you'd be smoking a pipe, and you'd give it to him, and he'd go back into the closet and pull out this black cassette that said like Eddie Murphy Coming to America, or what was the Whoopi Goldberg, like Jumping Jack Flash. And so like my mother would bring home like 6 or 7 videos, VHSs, that we would have for a week, and on a Saturday I would hear my father sort of laughing in the basement, and I would go down and I would sit there, and we could be in the same room because of Eddie Murphy and because of Whoopi Goldberg. because of these comedians who were sort of like safe, like they were guests in our home. So that's, oh my God, that's what they were. They were guests in our home through our television. Oh my God, I've never been able to put that together. And then
what about SNL and other TV shows?
Well, SNL, yeah, Three Stooges. We could watch the Three Stooges together. My father can laugh. He can laugh a lot, and he's a prankster. And there is this like weird thing that happens in the family where they actually don't think I don't share the same humor as my family anymore.
I was going to ask, could you make your father laugh?
No, I still don't make my father. I make my father laugh by the weird things that, like, he goes, that's weird.
What if that's why you're a comedian?
Yeah.
It's not because of the safe space. It's because you've been trying to make your dad laugh.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Huh. Oh, Jesus, now I have a new... Yeah.
Oh, yeah. New special.
But and I think a lot of that was my father's sort of thing was like trying to make me invisible. And so like when he would, like, eventually when my father was like, oh, I can't, like, he couldn't deal with the fact that he was being like physically violent with me anymore. Like, I think he was really struggling with that. So what he did was he tried to make me invisible. Like, he would just like ignore me. And like, that is something that just will set me off. And so I think a lot of my 20s was spent going, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And then it got to the point, and I think that's why I ended up standing alone on stage, was because it was like there was no way you could not make me invisible.
Very interesting.
So, and I would only, now I'm coming back to like comedy and writing new material, you know, having been through like quite a few things in my 30s, like having a kid and like coming to terms with all of my daddy issues and things like that. And now I'm on stage and it's not for the same reason.
Is there something that sets us apart style-wise then? I mean, the Americans seem to love Canadian comedians.
They do. I think that if I had to say anything negative about Canadian comedy, is that it is a little stuck in this between place where it's influenced by music hall from the UK and variety from the UK, and it's influenced by American stand-up and American comedy. And in that, Canadians are really good at building a punchline, but at the same time, they're also waiting for the audience to laugh on camera. And that's the only thing that I've ever noticed about a negative thing about Canadian comedy. I think that there's tons of room for our idea of comedy to grow in Canada. I think that in terms of like what more room do we have? Well, we have room for storytelling. We've seen that with Stuart McLean. Stuart McLean was a genius for what he did in creating that. Trailer Park Boys, it's not my taste, but it is good. I can say that. I wouldn't sit down to watch Trailer Park Boys. Letterkenny is still like following in that. So we have these veins, right? We have like Air Farce came into This Hour Has 22. Like you can trace back to like Codco. You can see the lineage of comedy. You can see Second City. You can actually walk through the Second City and look at all the original cast, and you can kind of go up until like 3 or 4 years ago when Second City Toronto started diversifying their cast, and you could see the archetypes of each person that was in there, from John Candy to Andrea Martin you can see it through the faces. They were literally just recasting from the beginning. And only recently have they started to put like diversity on their stage. And so I think that there is so much room. There's so much room. We just have to open up our ideas to what is available to audiences. We just have to connect with our audiences. I think that's what I'm trying to get to. We have to to really... Audiences have to stop watching what's happening in the States. My hope is, like, I think in a way that... Sorry, I'm in such a tangent right now. I think something's going to happen culturally in the States where it flips too far. Either they go full fascist and all of a sudden Canadians are going, whoa, wait.
Well, Roseanne's, her new show,
Yeah.
I mean, that's where they're headed because she's pro-Trump in the show.
Yeah, and it's starting to happen and people are reacting to it. Eventually, Canadians are going to have to go, you know what? We don't align with any of this anymore. What when we take that turn and we start looking back at ourselves and not through comparison, that's when comedy and all of this, our music, everything is going to go through a renaissance again.
Well, if you, I guess it's a different style of comedy, but like Corner Gas and then Little Mosque on the Prairie, I thought was, at least the premise of it seemed to be kind of innovative.
Yeah.
Set it in rural.
But they're all shot in the same style.
Right.
And that's sort of like, at what point do we stop waiting for the audience to laugh? Like, if you look at something at Arrested Development, that is aggressive, like, editing, aggressive, like, storytelling, aggressive, like, just, that's the timing. That
they're not waiting for the laugh.
They're not waiting for the laugh.
They don't even give space for it.
They're not waiting for that music hall laugh.
That's interesting. Kenny versus Spenny, I thought, was an interesting example of sort of Toronto feeling television, and that Kenny Hotz is pretty funny. Again, silly premises, but I think, and that's a sort of a question, is there seems to be it's got to be a little stupid and silly to be comedy. And so we can't be scrutinizing. I wonder if as Canadians we're always, because Trailer Park Boys, and again, it's a disaster to watch. It's a train wreck. But, you know, if you have the patience to look a little deeper, there's other elements there. But, so in Kenny versus Spenny, I mean, on the surface, it's very infantile. It's showing two of the worst examples of sort of male behavior, male childish relationships. And I don't know that there's even any kind of message at all behind it. There's no moral or theme or anything. It's just... it's just another train wreck to watch. But that, I guess, is that because that's what's funny, or is that what we will focus on because it's a train wreck? Did you watch much of that? I have a feeling this isn't up here. No,
I'm more of the Baroness von Sketch. I don't know. Have you seen that?
No.
That's a CBC, and that is, it's pretty amazing and kind of beautiful to watch.
I'm gonna guess it's a little more intelligent than the examples I've been giving.
Well, it's just it's remarkably new, but at the same time you're just like, okay, yes, like the idea that is groundbreaking in Canada is at the same time you're like, no, this is just where we should be. Like, let's forget about breaking the ground. Let's just get everybody up to speed. And this is the show that I think is starting, that is like, basically there was a gap between Kids in the Hall and Baroness von Sketch. And basically, in terms of CBC, that's the lineage that I could say. I could make a direct comparison between Kids in the Hall and Baroness von Sketch. And it's a show that people are like, oh, it's so funny. And it's all mostly, well, it's all female and some queer representation, which is kind of refreshing. Well, which is not just refreshing; it's important to see. But it is coming up to it. It is just basically saying, okay, everybody needs to be here right now. Let's get to this level. Let's get to this level in terms of audience.
Schitt's Creek, in its most recent season, seems to be getting there. And I'm an ass, so I'll say I waited a whole lifetime for CBC to make something funny.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that's not very accurate. But how about that show?
I I like it. I watched the first season. I haven't watched, and I hear it's been getting better.
It has. It really did get a lot better.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But there's like
laying down the premise in the first season, but it is getting.
And I think that I'm glad it's being made, and I'm glad that it's anything that gets made in Canada.
That's what I'm saying.
It is remarkable that anything gets made in Canada. And I think what we need to do is we need to start going, it got made, amazing. That got made, it's amazing. Just because something got made doesn't mean that you won't get something made. Like, if something gets made in Canada, it means that at least somebody's still making something.
Right.
And if somebody's making something shitty on YouTube, at least that's getting made. You know, if somebody, like... so I'm really dodging Schitt's Creek because the first season for me didn't really...
Same here. I'm telling you, it's getting more interesting to watch, and it's more...
It wasn't dark enough for me. Like, these are really despicable characters.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm like, if you're going to be a shit character, be a shit character.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't empathize with them as much as we are. Yeah.
Like, we don't need, like, if anything, like, did you watch Arrested Development?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that sort of cut up year that they did, where it was, like, sort of like...
shot out of sequence.
What was the Keanu Reeves movie that he did that was, like...
Oh... not the Matrix.
The Matrix.
Okay.
It's basically, I've called that the Matrix of comedy. And the difference between that first block of Arrested Development and then the Matrix season, which I call, is that there's no likable characters in it anymore. And like Arrested Development had the window characters. They had George Michael, and they had the Jason Bateman character, and then they had the George Michael character. And those were the two window characters, the two characters that you could like. And they were a window into sort of these horrible people living in this like what was it, like a model show home. And then we skip to it later, and we no longer like those characters. So there's no likable characters in the show. And for me,
although Buster, I meant
Buster Bluth, yeah.
When was Buster bad?
Well, Buster wasn't bad.
He's been a victim.
But he just wasn't a character that we weren't seeing through Buster's eyes.
That's right.
We were always observing Buster. Yeah. And for me, I think Schitt's Creek was kind of like putting in...
Well, we empathized with all the characters at some point in Schitt's Creek. That's an interesting observation, didn't occur to me.
Find us on Twitter at @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. You can find our episodes on Facebook and even YouTube. Find us on Android and Apple Podcast apps, iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry, Player FM, Google Play Music, TuneIn, Listen Notes, Castbox, and even Laughable. Almost anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
How do we watch you perform?
Well, I have lived mostly in the fringes. So, but I took some time off. Now I'm coming back. I got a show on OTV now, which is my one-man show that's playing on OTV, and that's going to maybe go on to Amazon after. So that's some immediate stuff.
Is that a special or a series?
It's a special. So it's my sperm donor show that I was touring, the Ginger Nation show. And I mean, I'm kind of starting by just getting time wherever I can. So like last night I did a charity for an LGBT shelter. That was kind of fun. Was on the set with Martha Chavez, who is amazing. And like maybe she would be great to talk to. She's great.
Okay.
Yeah. and an activist too. Yeah, wonderful.
What about these places, the Absolute or the Comedy Bar, or?
I'm would love to start working at Comedy Bar, or start getting in there. Work. The stuff you make is based on where you make it, and so I've always been making stuff like in theaters and in studios, and so that is that shapes how your work gets made, and basically the voice. I would like to start now making stuff in clubs, because I'm not afraid of that. I got to do I was down in North Carolina in November, and was opening for Mo Alexander, and that was pretty awesome. Like the first, I think I did 3 nights with him, and 4 show. Oh no, 2. It was 4 shows over 2 nights, and the first set was like a 7 o'clock set on a Friday, and I walked in there a little too confident, and I bombed in front of a Wilmington audience, and I was like, oh shit, did I bomb? And I was sort of sweating and thinking, oh god, they're gonna just tell me to leave. And the club owner came over, Amy, and she turned to me and said, you were literally saying things that they don't understand. And I said, oh, do you want me to change anything? She's like, no, here's a shot of whiskey. And she gave me a shot of whiskey, and she said, do the exact same thing at the 9 o'clock. And she was totally right. It was amazing. She was like, that was the audience. And she said, if the bar is laughing, then you're just worry about the bar. And it was so interesting to be in that environment. And then I thought a weird pairing with Mo Alexander was like, why did they ask me to be on this stage with Mo? And I was like, we are totally from different worlds. Mo turns out to be one of the biggest gay allies ever. He basically made me his comedy bitch, which was so amazing. He wrote this rap for me called like Gold Star Gay, and he was like made me come up and like it was a really wonderful thing. And it was sort of like getting to do some of my work that has only existed in theaters in that space, and having someone like Mo be like, that's funny. And so that has kind of made me want to go back into, or get my feet in the clubs. There's
a lot of clubs in the U.S., small ones.
Yeah.
In Buffalo, aren't they? They're all over the place.
Yeah. You can actually make a career at a comedy in the States.
Yeah. What about working both sides of the border?
That is the linchpin in any Canadian performer's
that's
career.
Like saying, what you want is a show like Larry David's.
Yeah.
What you want, like as if it didn't occur to you.
Yeah, it's a struggle. And there's a large drain of Canadian comedians going down to the States again. And it's happening right now. And I'm on that wagon. I'm looking at LA.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of going, you know what? I can go and for like a couple of years and just.
Well, I'm thinking about LA just as a tourist destination, but for the comedy, like, I mean, that's what you would do. You'd go down to the Comedy Store, the Improv,
or anywhere. Like they're doing shows in like photocopy places. They're doing shows in
the basement of bookstores.
Yeah,
you name it.
Taco bars, everything.
Why can't we have that here?
Yeah, and we do have it here. It's just it doesn't. There comes to a point where you smack your head on that glass ceiling, and it's a thud, and you either kind of learn to grow into it, like sort of a terrarium sort of thing, and you sort of like grow within the in the environment of that container. And a lot of people are lucky because they get into like gigs like with the CBC, and they get into that and they can build a career in that. But just because you don't fit into that model doesn't mean you should stop. And so if that means going and just going to a larger environment and being, a small fish there, why not?
Mm-hmm.
You can always come back.
Yeah.
And then you come back and everybody's like, oh, you've been to, you've done
Absolutely.
this. And then that sort of, and that is just plays into the Canadian mindset.
Where does your comedy come from? How do you write it? Premise first, punchline later. You take notes. You do dictation. One of the things that I'm interested in is, they say, you have to write down every good idea when it comes to you, or it's gone. And yet, comedians often have these photographic memories for jokes. Who said them, where, when.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you don't write this thing down, it's gone forever. What is that? I mean, it's an impossible job.
My thing is I have a couple things. I pretty much have a kind of a sloppy process right now. Used to be very rigid, and sort of like disciplined, and now it's a little bit like sticky notes. But I'm of the mindset that if you have an idea, somebody else is thinking the idea, so get it out as fast as possible. Then there's a repetition of things that in my head it repeats. So if I'm writing in a journal, I'll write in my book, like I'll just write it just to get it out of my head, and if it comes back, I'll write it back again on the next day, and just get rid of that idea, because that idea might not be actually, it might be a block, or it might be like an earworm, or it might be like something that is like just repeating you just so you get it out of the way so that you can get to the next idea.
Interesting.
So
I know that's true in art.
Yeah.
When you get an idea for a piece,
yeah,
you're stuck.
Yeah.
Until you've done something with it.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, totally. And often once you get a full picture of what you're trying to, like, it was funny, I know what the blow line to my next show is, but I write the end of the show and then write the beginning of the show.
Interesting.
The opening of the show, the first 5 minutes are the hardest. So I believe in the full circle. So the first joke is also the last joke. And so I now know the last joke. So I can now go back and write the first joke.
Interesting.
So I won't say what that joke is,
no, of course not.
But I don't want to burn it. But that's sort of,
no, it makes some sense.
Yeah.
And why is the first few minutes so difficult? It's because, and do you not want to bomb a little bit in the beginning to do something psychological to the audience?
Oh, I have bombed. Bombing, I agree with you. Bombing is really important, and it's one of the ways. That first 5 minutes is, you are setting tone, you're setting the relationship, you're setting speed, you are introducing yourself to probably 60, like the level that I'm at, maybe 60-70% of an audience who doesn't actually know you, or they know you and you have to sort of like be like, this is what we're in for tonight. So
this is asking too much about how the sausages make, but I'm just guessing. You don't want to set the bar too high when you first start, because you might have trouble living up to it.
The way that
under promise, under promise and over deliver.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's interesting. I build my shows the way drag queens build their shows, and that's only because like my exposure to like American cabarets and American comedy clubs, and where I really got to see where gay men could play and the way that they could play. Which there's this whole idea that gay men, where are the gay comedians? Where are the gay comedians? There's there are some prominent good gay comedians. Most are drag queens. So drag queens are actually the gay comedians for gay audiences. So the way that they write their shows is that they'll write basically what is kind of like a tree. And you get up the trunk and you say a joke, and then you kind of go, audience to respond to that one. Okay, so if the audience responded to that one, I'd go up this branch, but like I'm gonna go up this branch, and then they'll go, and in terms of their pattern, they'll say, okay, that joke went there, that joke, and then they know where the audience is. So when you're laying out the first 5 minutes of your show, you're building in jokes to get your audience where it's not your choose your own adventure, but you are getting them up here. Here's the next level. Here's the next level. Here's the next level. Here's the next level. To the point where you're just there. And Chris Rock said it in an interview, which I was like, so wonderful to hear him actually say the truth. And he said, you know, some nights you walk out on stage and you feel like you are doing a theater show. And sometimes you walk out on stage where you are on fire and like you are able to do that zigzag up. But like most shows are built with the structure in place, where that, you know, a default of a dead audience, because people don't want to blame audiences, but you know, audiences are there. And the problem sometimes with comedy audiences is that like, make me laugh.
Right.
Make me laugh now.
I remember as a kid being introduced to other kids you don't really know. Oh, here's Dave. He's really funny.
Yeah.
Make them laugh.
Yeah.
That's just like the worst.
Isn't it worse? Or tell that joke.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell that story. It's so funny. He tells this funny story. It's the funniest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And go.
Yeah. and even if you had, it was perfect, and the delivery, it's been set up to the point where, and of course you're on the spot. Yeah. The
hype cycle is so, it is a thing, and it's pretty dangerous if you're not aware of it.
Social media.
Yeah.
How do people follow you and get in touch and see your website and find your future bookings and all of this? What's your...
It's all at Shawn Hitchins,
okay.
Like ShawnHitchins.com, at Shawn Hitchins, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
You're not Shawn Hitchins 1792?
No, I am the Shawn Hitchins. Okay. There is this poor like straight kid in like, I think he's like in North Carolina or something. There's a Shawn Hitchins there. And when that Ginger Pride stuff was happening, he was like, who the fuck are you? And why are you ruining my life? And I was like, easy there, Shawn Hitchins. There's only, time for you to change your name. There's only one of us.
Nice. What about issues?
Yeah.
And the news?
Yeah.
And politicians?
Yep.
And serious subjects?
Mm-hmm.
Are any of them funny?
I mean, they're absurd.
Okay.
We're living in like pretty much an absurd time. And comedy changes. I think if we're not... What doesn't change is an audience desire to break tension, or the human desire to break tension. And that might mean that comedy changes, or comedy styles changes, or what we say changes, but the whole thing is, what will never stop is like the human need to just like break tension, laugh, have a catharsis that is not as valued as tears, because everybody like goes to a drama and they all sit there and they cry through it and they say, oh, it's so good, I cried after. You know, people leave a comedy show and they go, oh, it's so good, I laughed so hard. And I think what needs to happen is that like maybe a middle ground needs to start happening. And I think that's going to allow for a little bit more activism, a little bit more truth, a little bit more a responsibility of comedians being on stage and realizing that that if you're not going to say something of value, or if you're not going to connect with an audience, then you should get off the stage and allow somebody else to do it.
I can see how you'd make fun of Trump. I can see how you'd make fun of Doug Ford. Having trouble with Trudeau. But somebody's got to do it somehow.
Well, people don't want to touch Trudeau.
Yeah.
Cynthia Nixon said something very funny. Well, not funny, but like sort of something that kind of, do you know Cynthia Nixon, Miranda from Sex and the City? She's now running for governor of New York. I think governor? I don't know. She's running for office in New York, and she said, I think it was on Colbert, sorry, that liberals are embedded into the arts. We're embedded into the arts, and we've thought that that by making our art, we are progressing society, and just like we've been hiding in the arts. And it's time for us to realize that our art is only being consumed by the people who are built-in audiences. And it's time for us, and I'm extrapolating on it, I'm no longer speaking what she was saying, but like it's time for us to get out of that and realize that by doing our art, we are not actually evoking change at this point.
And you're speaking to your audience.
Yeah.
And that's a bubble.
Yeah, it is a bubble. So like, I'm always really, it sets my teeth on edge that you can go into a club and you can hear the same point of view. You can hear the same point of view. And the thing about stand-up comedy is that it's always the same rhythm. It's always the same rhythm. So you can have people, it's like a train, like somebody sets the thing, ba 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 ba. Next person comes on, and you hope that they can get that ba 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 ba. Next person comes on, ba 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 ba. And that's a great night of comedy because everybody's kept that sort of rhythm going. And I think that our audiences that is amazing, and it makes for an awesome night of comedy, but I think our audiences can handle a different rhythm. And they can handle people speaking in a different way.
Have you noticed any change in audiences over the last 5 or 10 years?
I think they've gotten more concentrated in certain areas, and that they have gotten that we actually don't know how to capture our audience anymore. Because somebody on YouTube could have like millions of followers and never step on stage. And
an interesting example is Miranda Sings. Are you familiar with her?
Oh, I love Miranda Sings.
She's great.
But she's of like, I like her in the way that I like a performer who I think is one of the greatest comedians, totally obscure name, Dina Martina. And it's of that clown and horror, and of that sort of oblivious character. And how does that, and I've never seen Miranda Sings on stage, but like she's made that bridge over. She's now getting into theaters because that's how you make money now.
Well, she had a series.
Yeah, with the Seinfeld.
Well, she was on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, which just right there. Yeah. If you look at every single person who's been on Comedians, it's Titans only. Yeah. And then one episode, Miranda Sings comes on. Yeah. And for the first time ever, Seinfeld buys her shtick and plays along with it, which has to be the greatest honor that you could possibly.
100%.
And so she had a series that ran one season. I think it's on Netflix. Yeah. But then that was it. And I was like, why is it only good stuff gets canceled? Like, and it's silly and it's a bit dumb and it's, whatever it is, but it's utterly unique. Well, it makes comments and statements about middle American society, about this revolution of social media that we're going on. Yeah. About all kinds of things are communicated through it. Anyway, very.
Did you see At Home with Amy Sedaris?
That's a special or a series?
It's a series.
Okay, I didn't see that one.
It was basically the real life. So Amy Sedaris has she was like Strangers in Candy, David Sedaris' sister. So like Humour runs in that family, and she had two books.
Is she the main actress who plays Strangers with Candy?
Yeah, she plays.
Yeah, she's been in a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, she's amazing. So she has a series called At Home with Amy Sedaris, and it's her take on a Martha Stewart show.
Huh.
But it is like one of the sharpest pieces.
Yeah.
And
I've liked her in everything I've seen her.
Yeah. I just think there's just more room for us. One of the shit things that comedians do is they label somebody not a comedian. Well, that guy's not a stand-up, or that guy's a storyteller. That's like, and I just think that there is a lot of room for variety. And if you're not exploring variety, then you are, the comedy purists, I get them. It is stand-up when it is amazing. There's no other comparison.
The old definitions, alternative and regular comedy, that probably doesn't even mean anything anymore because of what you're saying. There's so many fractured categories you can now be put in.
Yeah.
But I never really got a clear explanation of what it used to mean, alternative versus...
Alternative meant that you weren't you were working outside of like the clubs. So you were doing the coffee houses, you were doing I guess not even the coffee houses, but like...
I know, I thought it was the difference between sort of like Rodney Dangerfield's duffel bag full of jokes, which really weren't true self and in the moment, and weren't really based in truth at all, but they were definitely funny, versus this sort of self-exploratory true self. And you say the venues dictate the material. Yeah,
totally dictate the material. There's no way that you can't environment. And here, let's go back to the environment. Let's go back to everything where you create and what you are creating in and what you are surrounded by, and your influences dictate what comes out of you. You are just processing what you are experiencing.
That was Shawn Hitchins. His book, A Brief History of Oversharing, available at Amazon.ca and Indigo. In the US, Amazon.com and Barnes & Nobles. Also available as an audiobook. Look for links to his work on his website, www.shawnhitchins.com. Dave spoke with Shawn Hitchins in person in Toronto.
And for your information,
An Ontario election days away. New crimes connected to Donald Trump are exposed each week. In Ontario, we're a couple percentage points away from electing Rob Ford's brother. Under pressure from nuclear critics, the CNSC has moved public hearings from 60 kilometers away, with no public transit access available, to an infinitely more accessible location nearer to the Pickering plant. For the first time in memory, one of the three major political parties has actually said the word nuclear in an election campaign. The leader of the NDP says if elected they would close the Pickering nuclear plant rather than operate it beyond its predicted life expectancy. A plant that loses money, is not required, and whose electricity is given away to the Americans almost for free.
Find us on Twitter @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Find us on Android and Apple Podcast apps. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
This has been TMI.